Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. Jeff, good to see you from afar.
Great.
I'm going to take a slightly broader view in my few minutes in the spirit of the meeting, I hope. As you know, my primary job is as an editor, and that means that I'm mostly concerned with the power of words and ideas in public health and medicine. So I'm interested in the conditions and prospects for new words and new ideas as we confront the pandemic. Now, the premise of this conference, as I understand it, from a European perspective, is that we face an interlocking set of crises across public health, human rights, migration, political legitimacy and equality, environment, all of which comes together into what I see you described as a profound crisis of values. It was only during the Second World War that Europe faced a similarly catastrophic set of crises on this scale. And it's interesting to compare and contrast the way certain groups within our society responded to those crises. In the early 1940s, there were some who saw the need for a radical transformation in the world order. And in my brief remarks today, I want to cite two such writers, briefly summarize what they had to say, contrast their far-reaching vision with the surprising lack of ambition shown during this particular set of crises that we're living in now, and offer some very condensed points for consideration. The first writer, who might be a surprise to some, is H.G. Wells, who you will all know as a science fiction novelist, The War of the Worlds, The Time Machine, The Invisible Man. But he was also the founding father, one of the founding fathers of PEN International, the world's oldest human rights organization. And his 1940 book, The Rights of Man, laid the intellectual groundwork for the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. He wrote this book in 1940 because he saw that the world's peoples during war were living at a period of insecurity, suspicion, and precaution. Trust was evaporating. A shadow of fear had been cast over the planet. There could be no peace, no safety, without a profound reconstruction of the methods of human living. And he urged in his book that there needed to be the most ruthless discussion of every aspect and every possibility of the present situation, not simplistic slogans, one could say, like "Build Back Better." He was terrified that we might fail to seize the opportunity to set out our aspirations for a new world. And his response, working with others, was to write a Declaration of Rights, broad principles on which our public and our social life should be based. I'm going to read you the very first right. It's short, but it's striking. That every person is joint heir to all the resources, powers, inventions, and possibilities accumulated by our forerunners, and entitled without distinction of race, color, or professed belief or opinions to the nourishment, covering, medical care, and attention needed to realize their full possibilities of physical and mental development, and to keep them in a state of health from birth to death. And you can see in that statement the centrality of protecting what we might today call human security. This and other rights, there were 10 paragraphs, set out what he described as the fundamental law of humankind throughout the whole world. His goal was not to create utopia. His goal was to rally the shattered forces of human reconstruction, what he called world regeneration, a map of our future world, a world where there would be no outcasts. He already had come up with the idea of not leaving anybody behind in 1940, a world where we took the idea of community, a word that's pretty dominant at this meeting, seriously. The second writer I want to draw attention to, you will certainly be conscious of, perhaps more so, and that's George Orwell. And in his book in 1941, called The Lion and the Unicorn, he was no less visionary or important in what he had to say. His purpose was to diagnose his country, and his country was England. And he believed that it was essential to make an accurate diagnosis of what was taking place in England before deciding what part England could play in the future. He thought that concepts such as justice, liberty, and truth were still believed in despite the crises of wars. But he also saw that England was two nations, the rich and the poor. Just as in our own time, inequality was deep and a bloody wound on the body of society. He brilliantly railed against England's snobbery and privilege. He wrote, "What was it that at every decisive moment made every British statesman do the wrong thing with so unerring an instinct?" What's changed, you could ask today? He also went on, "England is a family with the wrong members in control." What he argued for was a world state of free and equal human beings, of equality of human rights, a fundamental shift of power, a fight against privilege and inefficiency, a new English revolution. And there was only a narrow window of opportunity to see that that future could win. His prescriptions were both of their time, but also strikingly resonant today. A greater role of the state in industrial strategy, a minimum wage, reform, investment in education, and perhaps a little hopefully, a complete shift of power away from the old ruling class. He wrote, "The choice before us is not so much between victory and defeat as between revolution and apathy." So stepping back now, looking at the roles and influence of Wells and Orwell, one might ask, where are the writers, the intellectuals, the journalists, the novelists, the commentators, let alone the politicians, with the far-reaching ambition of those two individuals? At least I can say, in the English-speaking world, they are absent, or at least they are silent. Coronavirus seems to have anesthetized us rather than provoked us. We seem to crave the quiet return to normality, not an energetic response or advance to a realistic, repaired, reformed, and enriched future. Yet there are possibilities. We have COP26 coming up in Glasgow, an opportunity to hold governments accountable to ensure sharper reductions in greenhouse gas emissions. It is remarkable to reflect that only one country is 1.5 degrees compatible by the end of the century, and that is the Gambia.
Yeah.
Attacking extreme inequality by taxing concentrations of wealth, attacking extreme inequality by challenging concentrations of power, paying reparations to some of the least advantaged nations for the ravages of European colonial exploitation, delivering on universal health coverage, delivering on universal access to education, and broadening and deepening our democracies by greater citizen engagement. To end, H.G. Wells asked, in the middle of war, what are we fighting for? We might ask, in the middle of a pandemic, what are we surviving for? Today, Nobody has articulated a clear answer. It's time for us to do so. Thank you.